You're going to have to help reread the thing today. For some reason, I got a little something in my neck. I can't turn my head.
Did you sleep wrong, or what happened,
It was
man?
like yesterday.
Okay.
It's weird.
Okay.
Usually that goes away.
Yeah.
Hasn't really gone away totally. It's almost there.
You need to get you a
It's
chiropractor,
only when I turn
man.
to the right.
Get you an adjustment.
So if I cut you off on the highway, that's because I can't see.
There we go. Well, it's John Whitby we'll just go with. If any check gets written, it's on the O-line. They majority investment, a.k.a. Trevor, will drive this team, but not on these used tires, though. We need long life threading for this bus. Treading, I think. Yeah. We need long life treading for this bus.
Yeah, that could happen. I don't know if that happens now, though. That might be a next year thing where there's even more investment on the offensive line. Do remember this about the Jags. They have made investment on the offensive line. You might not like all the investment, but they are paying Cam Robinson $21 million. They do have Walker Little even as a backup, who was a second-round pick. They just paid Ezra Cleveland, who I think is very significant and interesting part of this equation that very few talk about. They drafted Fortner, didn't work out. They just paid Mitch Morse a little bit, and so they went and got him. I wouldn't say they're paying him top dollar by any means. They are sticking with Sheriff for another year. They restructured that contract. That's an interesting one now. Mm-hmm. Talk about the wheels falling off. Is he done? Does he have anything left in the tank? And then obviously they committed the first-round pick with their right tackle, Anton Harrison, who I'm a big fan of. So it's not like they're not invested. Now, to your point, could they be more invested on the offensive line? I think absolutely. I think they could try to go break the bank for a center or right guard next year if things don't work out, or even if things do work out. It might just be time to go break the bank a little bit. I think what they really hope is something like Cooper Hodges steps up and is able to be that right guard in the future, and that's a steal at a seventh-round pick.
No, without a doubt. But keep in mind, once again, you're going to have both, well, essentially, we'll say Cam Robinson and another left tackle and Walker Little be on free agency if one of those guys doesn't get paid.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a big question of how do you replace that left tackle then? What is the plan going to be? Because, I get the cornerback position, super important, right? But you almost want to keep cohesiveness with offensive line. So do they break the bank and re-sign Cam Robinson? Do they offer Walker Little, who, when thrust into the tackle spots, hasn't done a bad job? Because, once again, it's all about familiarity with Trevor Lawrence as well. I assume Trevor would want to keep the same faces around as opposed to, all right, let's draft somebody. All right, let's trade for somebody on the offensive line.
Yeah, overall, nobody ever feels good about their offensive line. I understand that.
The Ravens feel pretty good.
Yeah, just in general and speaking.
Okay.
I have felt better than other people in the last couple of years. But last year, they didn't deliver for me. They didn't make me look good.
Sure, yeah.
They care about me.
Yeah.
I will say this. I have come around on this because, again, I feel like sometimes the offensive line isn't very thought-through conversation. I think it's just like we suck. I just think fans think that. Fans naturally just kill the offensive line. It's a very hard position. I think it relies on so many different things. What I've said about this offensive line is individually, I kind of like the players. In some instances, I really like the players. But as a whole, they just didn't work for whatever reason, last year specifically. So I understand rankings that come out and say the offensive line of the Jags is like 25th, or you don't like the offensive line. I can come with you a little bit more coming off last year. I understand the question marks. Is Mitch Morse the answer? I don't know. He might have been Band-Aid at he's needed his own Band-Aids at time because of his health. Sheriff could be, it goes fast in the NFL now.
Yeah.
How good is Sheriff? I like Sheriff. I respect the hell out of his career, but he's definitely on that backside of his career. Ezra Cleveland, we just don't know much about. And then, of course, I actually feel good about their tackles because even if Cam isn't healthy, I feel good about Walker Little, quite frankly. And I like Anton Harrison. But the stuff in the middle, which was where the problem was last year, I think there are certainly questionable things, not just to say, we don't like our offensive line. I think those are legitimate questions that these guys as individuals, Phil Rauscher as an offensive line coach, they have to answer.
Yeah, when you talk about being a football fan, the offensive line is really the only position where you can succeed and kick ass and no one will say a word.
Yeah.
And if you do bad, you'll get roasted, you'll get crucified on Twitter. And that's the way offensive line works, because you had an offensive line in Tennessee that I feel like never got any love, but it was always a Derrick Henry show. Like, man, Derrick Henry, one of the best. Okay, and yeah, Derrick Henry is one of the best running backs in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, but guess what? Those holes are pretty open sometimes too for him, and then he finished the job. So when we talk about what the Jaguars have, yeah, I think they have good to great talent on the offensive line, but the cohesiveness was lacking. And, as Jaguars fans, we could have said last year, okay, the edge on defense, fantastic. Why? Because the numbers say so. Interior, not so much. So look at how much you gave towards the end in the run game. How many quarterback sacks the interior offense or defensive line have? Not that many. We can sit here and say, yeah, the interior defensive line last year didn't play up to the standard. On the other side, it's hard for us to sit here and say, okay, well, was it Cam Robinson's fault? Was it Ezra Cleveland's fault? Whose fault? Well, we know it's Luke Fortner, right? Because that just shined on tape. But the other guys, there was some good, there was some bad. But I think, and this is what Doug Peterson's thinking now, it's okay. The big glaring hole was Luke Fortner. So we get him out. We replace him now with a savvy, crafty veteran who's seen a lot of football, who can help with the blitzes and call things out. And then we keep what we had but last year, and that's kind of like your all-in moment. I think it's Doug Peterson saying, we like the talent that we have, but now we're going to add to the cohesiveness with Mitch Morse.
Yeah, the cohesiveness is a great word here. You need it. It's a true thing. But this group overall has had some games together. Mitch Morrison now, Ezra Cleveland thrown in there. But that right side, those guys played together, and Cam's played with a bunch of different guys. They got to get it right, right? They got to figure it out. And really, left guard and center were their problems last year. I mean, revolving door at left guard, and then obviously the poor player, Luke Fortner, just wasn't enough. So we'll figure out if they get it right. I can see, again, I'll come with you here. I can see why people are like, what if this happens? This could be a disaster. I don't necessarily think it's hanging on a thread. I don't think the Jags season is hanging on a thread. But that's just natural. Every team is going to have some question marks for the most part. The Jags' question marks are their offensive line. Is it going to hold up and be better? I think, is their pass rush going to be deep enough? And who's playing like that other corner spot? I think those are some of the not hanging on a thread, but critical questions to be answered. How those answers turn out could depend on how this season ends up.
It's wild that we put Doug Peterson on the hot seat in terms of Trevor's performance, right? Like, Trevor Lawrence needs to have a big year this year to solidify, all right, Doug Peterson is the man for the job. If Trevor Lawrence stays healthy the entire year and puts up numbers like last year, well, then we're questioning, okay, is it the play calling? Is it the offensive coordinator? Is it Doug Peterson? All these things. But what's forgotten about, I feel like, a lot going into the season is the offensive line, where they said, hey, we're all set. We'll change the center position, but everything else, we like him. And Doug Peterson's a big offensive line guy. Go back to his time in Philadelphia. He was one of the architects of that offensive line that went to the Super Bowl. That struggled then after the Super Bowl. So I get that Trevor's performance will be directly tied to Doug Peterson, but this offensive line needs to be tied to Doug Peterson as well if they do well, or if they fail to reach expectations.
Yeah, and one other thing here, and the chat's bringing this up, I think it is an interesting conversation because you've brought this up in the context of the Buffalo Bills and maybe even the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. Buffalo Bills went from a pass-happy team which didn't run the ball at all. That's not the Jags. I mean, they threw the ball and put the ball in Josh Allen's hand way more than they do for Trevor Lawrence over these last couple of years. But the Bills backtracked on that a little bit. They pulled it back. They ran the football. They ran it pretty effectively last year. We'll see if they continue to do it. But you've suggested that the Jags might do that too. The chat's basically talking about bringing in that extra lineman, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, could you use Walker Little as an extra tackle, right? Could you use the tight end and Farrell and those guys? Use a fullback a little bit more. Use Tank Bigsby a little bit more as the 1-2 punch. We've had these conversations. So that might be a way to lean. That might be the Doug Peterson answer, right? It's okay, we don't have to change our offense, but let's just shift a little bit more to also help not only our offensive line, but Trevor Lawrence. Help our offensive line by going downhill a little bit. Now, they got to be able to go downhill a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think when you talk about that, you talk about 2 tight end sets, right? That to me would be the best route of going. I get Walker Little can be versatile. You bring him in as a big blocker. The reason why I don't like that on every down. Like, okay, if you want to go 4th and 1, all right, bring in Walker Little because you know what you're going to do. But I don't like bringing Walker Little all the time because then it almost pigeonholes you in what you're trying to do, right? Because if I see a big tackle coming in, 9 times out of 10, it's probably going to be a run.
9.5.
Yeah, 9.5. Now, sometimes you want to do some trick plays and things like that. More power to you. Walker Little gets a big man touchdown. Everyone rejoices and goes crazy. That might happen. But I would rather see 2 tight end sets where it's like, okay, what are we going to do here? Is it going to be a pass or a run? Hard to tell. Set up that play action. Or if you bring in a fullback, if you use Evan Ingram or whoever has an H-back in the backfield, you can still keep defenses on their toes. I've broken it down before. What makes San Francisco so great, set aside from great players, is the fact that they have a fullback who can do it all. They have a fullback who can block, but guess what? Is also a pretty damn good receiving threat, and that's why he's the highest paid fullback in the NFL. If you can get something along those lines with an H-back, with an Evan Ingram, with maybe Brenton Strange, whoever the case may be, well, now you got something because it's all about keeping the defense on their toes.